Inglés para el Desarrollo Conferencia Bienal Cuba 2021, del 9 al 11 de noviembre en plataformas virtuales. Te invitamos a intercambiar sobre tendencias actuales en la enseñanza del inglés y el cambio climático en la educación lingüística. Inglés para el Desarrollo Conferencia Bienal Cuba 2021, un espacio para conectar, intercambiar, crecer.
Hello everyone in Cuba. It's a great honor for me to be able to share some ideas and resources with you today. I remember being able to visit Havana for the British Council's English Language Teaching Conference a few years ago and being very impressed with the enthusiasm and resourcefulness of the English teachers that I had the pleasure to meet then. It's a shame I'm not able to be there in person this year, but I'm also very happy that despite this, I can still share knowledge with you today. This indeed is an example of some of the things I'm going to be talking about in these presentations. First of all, my name is Graham Stanley, and I am the English for Educational Systems lead for the British Council in the Americas, and I'm based in Mexico City. In these presentations, I'll be looking at what we have called new ways of teaching, and in particular, how teachers can prepare themselves for these new ways of teaching through continuous professional development, or CPD. What does best practice in CPD look like in 2021? How can teachers best take advantage of the opportunities that our connected world offers? I'll be exploring these questions and more as I look at a range of CPD options recommended for English teachers, from collaborative expertise to exploratory action research, online community of practice, and more. And I hope some of what I have to say is relevant and of interest to you. So, apart from being the name of this presentation, New Ways of Teaching is also what we've called the British Council Americas regional program aimed at English teachers. On the accompanying website, we have lots of resources, including online events and recordings, podcasts and videos, tips and ideas, and research and reports. And in this first video, I'm going to be looking at research and insight in particular. Now, I know it's difficult for Cuban teachers to access resources online, but I also know that despite this, we have a number of teachers from Cuba who are always present at our online events and in our courses, which is very encouraging. I also think we're looking at ways of providing resources for English teachers in Cuba that are easier to access, and that this conference will be an example of us trying to do this, so I hope it works. So let's start with what research and insight have told us about the situation in the Americas as far as English teaching is concerned. Now, the British Council has commissioned research recently, and we'll be looking at this too. But I'm going back to 2017 and this report by the Inter-American Dialogue, which identifies a number of challenges that are still prevalent across the region, and some suggestions here of how to tackle them. So principally, this report identifies the following: a lack of sufficient, well-prepared English teachers, which is a bottleneck in most countries. Now, there's some example solutions for tackling this in the report. Remote teaching is probably the most effective one, and I'll be exploring this in a separate video. Another suggestion that comes out of the research is for teachers to move out, for us to move out of our comfort zones, to expand our networks and to learn from others. So for teachers who work in public education, for example, to share knowledge and ideas with others, for English teachers to learn from subject teachers and vice versa, to learn from other countries, as well as sharing what has been done in your own country internationally. And that's an example of what we're trying to do here. That can be called collaborative expertise. Now, another important challenge is the lack of data available in many countries. And before we can come up with solutions to challenges, I think we need to identify exactly what those challenges are. And research, insight, and data about the education system is the first step towards doing this. Adopting an evidence-based approach rather than an anecdotal-based approach, I think both when it comes to our own classrooms and on a larger scale, is also a more effective way of doing things. So you can see this in other research done globally, such as this one, the Teaching and Learning International Survey, or TALIS. Overwhelmingly, teachers reported in this survey that professional development based on collaboration and collaborative approaches to teaching was what had the most impact on their practice. And this is why CPD is such an important part of being a teacher. Here are some more findings of the TALIS 2018 report, which shows that the best CPD is not surprisingly adapted to the teacher's needs and built on prior knowledge, and is very much rooted in helping teachers apply what they learn in a practical way to their own classroom. No surprises there then, but it's always a good idea to have assumptions confirmed. Moving now on to recent times and the pandemic and school closures, the British Council decided to conduct two major surveys when the crisis hit and schools all over the world were forced to close. The results of these surveys are available to download on the Teaching English website. One report provides a snapshot of the policies and practices of schools and the provision of remote learning in the state primary and secondary sectors. And then a second snapshot looks at what changed from the first report. The second report provides insight into the experience and professional needs of more than 9,600 teachers around the world, and includes teacher educators' responses as well from over 150 countries as they learn to support learners. Recently, the British Council Americas commissioned research, and I'm hoping I can share this with you to download in case you're interested. The first of these, RASCRA, the Research and Analysis of Schools Closures Response in the Americas, revealed some very interesting things about educational systems and teaching and how prepared teachers were and schools were as they, it also showed that teachers and schools actually responded very innovatively with imagination, resourcefulness to the recent crisis, which is very interesting to share. For instance, initiatives that promoted collaboration spaces and the construction of professional learning communities turned out to be fundamental for the support and training of teachers. And 51% of the teachers who interviewed considered that their most important allies in the training were their own colleagues. In the New Ways of Teaching report, which looked at what kind of CPD teachers teaching remotely needed, it was revealed that teachers' associations and unions have been a major resource for teacher education and professional support during the pandemic. So let's look at some in detail in the RASCRA findings. Just one of them from this slide. Now, it's interesting that the educational community highly valued participative spaces for dialogue and thought in the process of decision making. And this allowed for far more contextualized solutions when the emergency came. Moving on, I think the transition from face-to-face to distance education implied the incorporation of some cases unprecedented of digital technology, the teaching and learning process when it could be adopted. And of course, the need for contextualized solutions gave space for broader decision margins, resulting in an increase in autonomy for schools. Another key finding was the interest in and need to develop formative assessment instances. In other words, assessment practices that lead to and contribute to further learning of students rather than just testing to show what a student knows or can do. And there was also greater appreciation of the role of the teacher and the school space as important elements in the education of students. The link between the school and families was also made more visible and strengthened, and homeschooling by parents and guardians became an important factor in the crisis. When it comes to curriculum changes and resources, 50.7% of the teachers consulted made curricular adaptations to their students. And according to the results, the most used resources were materials developed by teachers themselves. And the most effective strategies were asynchronous, so not live solutions, with follow-up and facilitation by the teacher. And that involved materials that the teacher developed themselves. 46% of the teachers stated that household chores affected the process of teaching when students were home. And in many countries, teachers lived in households with school-age children, and they had a lack of devices or problems with connectivity when they were trying to learn through the internet. As far as continuous professional development concerns, 51% of the teachers interviewed considered that the most important allies in the training were our colleagues, as I said before. Good practices that were identified include inclusion of socio-emotional content in the curriculum and teacher strategies for using that, developing an emergence of communities of practice, so groups of teachers working together to share knowledge and resources, and engagement of families in the learning practice. Now, although there's still not enough information regarding student learning and the effectiveness of the programs and policies implemented in different countries, the analysis of the experiences and focus and perception of teachers who participated allow us to glimpse some significant points. Now, those programs or initiatives that had long-term vision were very useful, more meaningful, and the greater diversification of strategies had a greater influence and were able to reach more students. And countries that had digital preparation and clear objectives prior to the pandemic were able to face the closure of schools without great difficulties. I think the key there is access to connectivity and the internet allowed for a far more better response than in those countries where connectivity problems or devices were lacking. So I'd like to finish now by encouraging all of you to do some research in your own classroom. So I really do think that research and insight into our own practice can help you with your teaching. And this is easy to do. Now, one way of doing this that I recommend is by using a framework developed by Paula Reviero of Chile and Richard Smith in the UK called Exploratory Action Research. The idea behind this is for the teacher to identify something in their classroom that they want to better understand, to observe, and collect evidence. This can be anything that you'd like to know more about, and it's very much rooted to you, your classroom, and the learners. I think exploratory action research is one of the most empowering things you can do as a teacher, and the idea of evidence-based CPD targeting your own teaching can be very revealing and truly transform your own practice. If you do want to find out more about this, there are now lots of resources to help you, such as the handbook and examples of stories that have been published under the label Champion Teachers by the British Council. Programs have been carried out in Chile, in Peru, Colombia, and Mexico, and I'm going to make some of these available to you. Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. My name is Graham Stanley, and I'm English for Educational Systems Lead for the British Council in the Americas. Now, I have 3 presentations for you for this conference. In these presentations, I'll be looking at what we've called new ways of teaching, and in particular, how teachers can prepare themselves for this through continuous professional development, or CPD. What does best practice in CPD look like in 2021? How can teachers best take advantage of the opportunities that our connected world offers? I'll be exploring these questions and more as I look at, in this video, remote teaching and CPD. I hope some of what I have to say is relevant and of interest to you. So my name is Graham Stanley. I'm the British Council's lead, as I said. Before taking on my current role, I was previously responsible for managing the Sabal and Inglés project in Uruguay in partnership with Plan Sabal. And this project uses video conferencing to remotely teach around 80,000 children or primary students in schools English. If you're interested in the details, you can read more in the book of case studies and research that was published by the British Council in 2019. And this can be freely downloaded from the Teaching English website, and I'm hoping to share it with you in another way in the conference as well today. So I'll be sharing with you now some other things that we found out about remote teaching to help teachers teach in this way, and also aspects of what makes a good remote teacher, what they need to learn more about, and especially if you're new to remote teaching. And this was shared also in an article that was published by the IATEF, Teacher Association Learning Technology Special Interest Group. Now, I know in Cuba that most of you will not be able to teach using the internet in this way, but some of the things I'm going to talk about will be relevant to any of you who are able to and are planning to record videos to support your learners. And also, I think it's important for all teachers to be aware of these new ways of teaching, so you're ready and able to adopt them if necessary. I hope you agree. So, as I mentioned, from 2013 to 2018, I was part of a large project the British Council managed with Plan Sabal in Uruguay, teaching primary school students remotely and using teachers based in the UK, in Uruguay, Argentina, the Philippines, and early on from Mexico and Colombia. Now, to try and improve the project, we surveyed and interviewed teachers and asked experts in different areas of this complex project to write about it. We also have case studies, and they're all published in this book. And I think these lessons learned will be relevant to teachers teaching remotely, but also teaching video, as I said before, and also really of interest to any teacher, I think, of English. So one of the major challenges of teaching remotely is keeping students engaged and motivated. And here are 8 factors that should be taken into account. Number 1, eye contact and screen presence. How can you best establish eye contact when teaching students with a camera and teaching students remotely? Well, the way is actually to look directly into the camera. So the problem is, of course, is that usually as a teacher, and myself as well, I'm in the same position today. I have some materials that I'm looking at which are just below the camera, but I think you do need to remember to look directly into the camera if you want to establish eye contact with students or people that you're talking to. You also shouldn't do what I'm doing today. If you're teaching, you shouldn't just be a talking head. It's much better if you're teaching students, in particular English, for it to be memorable, and you shouldn't just present yourself in this way. You could stand up, you could do things, you could show different things on the camera. You also should exaggerate your body language, exaggerate your gestures and face expressions, gesticulate, use mannerisms, posture and stance to convey emotion. You also should be concerned with your use of voice. You can vary the volume, you can talk quietly, You can talk louder, and this will help vary the pace. Minimize distractions. So keeping the attention of students online can be a challenge. So you should try and minimize the distractions that you have going on as far as possible. I know there's some building work going on at the moment, so I apologize if you hear the sounds of people drilling and hammers. Unfortunately, they're my neighbors and I can't ask them to stop. But what you can do is to try and minimize this as much as possible, if it is possible. Use of the camera. You can, of course, show realia. You can try and show things. There's a telephone. There's a cat with a wobbly head. Whatever you can find to show on the camera to illustrate what you're able to teach would be useful, I think. You can zoom in and zoom out. Now, it's difficult to do with a fixed webcam, but you can actually move your body to zoom in, zoom out, or to pan. So that's a way you can do it. You have to think inventively, I think, creatively about how you can use the camera to illustrate what you're doing and also capture attention of the students. You should also be very familiar with your technology, the technology that you're using. You should know what to happen, and you should also be prepared. So you don't want to turn up on a camera and wonder or look for things that you're able to do. You need to know exactly what you're going to say and have everything available, your materials, etc. And then also troubleshooting. You can expect something to go wrong sometimes, and you need to learn how best to deal with it and establish a plan B. So that's how to keep students engaged and motivated when using a camera. Now, when I was in Uruguay, we decided to adapt the British Council's framework for teachers to help teachers become better at remote teaching. And here are some of the things that we found out when we surveyed the teachers to hear what they had to say, but also asked questions of the quality managers who are responsible for supporting the remote teachers and for observing them. So here are a few things. A good remote teacher adapts the objectives of the lesson to the characteristics of the class, culture, age, needs and interests. That's true of face-to-face teaching, of course, which is true of some of these. A good remote teacher also anticipates problems of teaching remotely and thinks of solutions with the classroom teacher. The classroom teacher was another teacher that we had actually with the students when we were teaching remotely. They weren't based at home. A good remote teacher is well prepared and ready before starting the class. Of course, that's every teacher. And a good remote teacher finds a way of communicating effectively at a distance. Now, I tried to give you some examples of that when we first in the previous activity that I did. A good remote teacher also trains students to use the learning management system. If you have a system which students use when you're not actually teaching live, that would be that. And then some of the other things on here I think are worth thinking about. I'm not going to have time to go into the details, but I think you could pause the video and reflect on some of them if you like. And that is it. So I hope this has been useful. And I think I'll be continuing with the third video about CPT in general. Thank you very much. Bye. Hello everyone, my name is Graham Stanley and I am the British Council's English for Educational Systems lead in the Americas, based in Mexico City. In the second of 3 presentations for this conference, I'll be looking at what we've called new ways of teaching, and in particular, how teachers can prepare themselves for this through continuous professional development, or CPD. What does best practice in CPD look like in 2021? How can teachers best take advantage of the opportunities that our connected world offers? I'll be exploring these questions and more as I look at a range of CPD options recommended for English teachers, from collaborative expertise to exploratory action research, online communities of practice, teacher activity groups, and more. I hope some of what I have to say is relevant and of interest to you all. So to begin with, let's look at what CPD means. I'm using this definition. Continuing professional development, CPD, is a planned, continuous and lifelong process. Through it, teachers develop their personal and professional qualities and improve their knowledge, skills and practice. This improves their professional autonomy, their performance in the classroom and the development of their organisation and learners. What about CPD for you? Is it usually decided by your institution, decided by you and the other teachers that you work with, something you do unsupported by your institution, or not something you do much or any of? So what I'd like you to do is to find someone to discuss this with, a colleague, for example. If you want, you can also have a discussion about some of the things I'll be mentioning later on here. Perhaps even talk about the possibility of trying it out with your colleague or colleagues. If you join forces with another teacher to do this, I think you can more appreciate it and better support each other and help each other through the process. So, starting out as a teacher, you quickly realise that I think your initial training course is only the start of your journey, and that in order to become effective, you need to develop continuously. Fortunately, what I found really useful are frameworks to help you that will enable you to understand what you don't know, to self-assess and to decide what to focus on. Now, here's one that was developed by Donald Freeman. It's called the KASA framework. So knowledge, awareness and skills. The British Council has a framework that I've used quite a lot of because I work for the British Council, of course. And this is their CPD framework. It's part of a program of resources to support teachers called Teaching for Success. And it reflects what we think is important for English teachers and how to develop. Now, the one on the left is for teachers and the one on the right is for teacher educators. So there's a framework for teacher educators as well. There are 12 professional practices in the one on the left that the British Council have identified as being important, and 4 stages of development in the teacher framework. And then we also have listed language proficiency and qualifications. Now, I first started using this as a teacher and found it very useful to raise awareness of what I knew and what I didn't know. And it helped me make decisions about what I needed to improve upon, what I needed to know more about as my own, and changed my direction of how I became as a teacher. We'll find out later that I think it's very useful, just as useful to know for you to take advantage of as an individual teacher as to use with a group of teachers if you're responsible for helping them with their development. So how do you feel about teacher associations? Now, this for me is another way, a great way of being able to help you develop as a teacher. Are you a member of a teacher association? Throughout the years, I've been an active member of an association based in the UK called IATEFL. I was coordinator of a special interest group, the Learning Technologies Special Interest Group. And then I became until recently, a newsletter editor for the same SIG or special interest group. I really recommend this. It's a perfect way of meeting other teachers and of developing professionally. We met, we shared knowledge and experience, we met face-to-face, we met online, and this is how I got involved with presenting to colleagues as well and writing articles. So it's a great way of developing professionally. Now, another way of doing CPD is called a teacher activity group, and it's one of the most interesting ways that I've been involved in of developing professionally. Although the term wasn't around at the time when I was involved, the concept definitely was put into practice. So instead of all teachers coming together for an event, for a presentation, what happens with teacher activity groups or tags is that you split into groups and around a certain special area of interest. And then you meet from time to time. Regularly is good, once a month or more frequently, for example, in order to help each other increase knowledge and skills. And you can, when you come together, you can prepare little mini presentations, or you can just ask each other questions or share things that have happened in your classroom, etc. It's up to you, really. Tags then are communities of practice made up of small numbers of teachers who meet regularly for the purpose of professional development. And when CPD, as the findings quoted here show, is more linked to what happens in your own classroom, that when it's more driven by teachers and is more collaborative than top down, it is then generally more effective. So tags exactly are peer-led support groups which teachers can join as part of their professional development. I really do recommend it, and it's an example of collaborative expertise at work. Now, similar to how I started, I'd like to finish by encouraging you to discuss these questions with a colleague. So again, find a colleague, the same colleague or a different colleague, to discuss these questions. If you want, you can have a discussion about some of the things that I've mentioned here, perhaps even talk about the possibility of trying some of it out in your own classroom or with colleagues. If you join forces, as I said, with another teacher to do this, you can really help each other, support each other through the process. So what about you? Are you a member of a teacher association or a community of practice? Are you an organizer or a committee member of a teacher association or a community of practice? If you're not involved now, but you're interested, how would you go about starting it up? Reflect on these and talk about your experience. Now, to return to teacher activity groups, would you be interested in starting or joining one of these? What would your tag, your teacher activity group be about if you are? And would that be something that you would easily find colleagues who are interested in doing the same thing about, or would it be difficult? What would it be? I hope you find this short presentation of interest and that you can learn from it. Thank you very much.
Nuestros proyectos en inglés están enfocados a conectar los ámbitos educativos de Cuba y el Reino Unido para enriquecer la enseñanza y aprendizaje de este idioma como segunda lengua en el país. Con este objetivo promovemos el diálogo y la colaboración entre los claustros, las instituciones y las organizaciones de educación básica y superior de ambas naciones, y hemos logrado firmar memorandos de entendimiento con ambos ministerios y con diferentes universidades del país. Fomentamos el intercambio de experiencias y buenas prácticas con expertos británicos y apoyamos el desarrollo de habilidades técnicas y pedagógicas en las nuevas generaciones de profesores de idioma inglés. En 2016, el gobierno de la isla introdujo una nueva estrategia para la enseñanza del inglés en estudiantes universitarios con el propósito de garantizar a los jóvenes profesionales un alto nivel de preparación en esa lengua. Desde entonces, el British Council ha impulsado acciones de colaboración sobre políticas educacionales de conjunto con el Ministerio de Educación Superior y con el apoyo de expertos británicos, un acercamiento que no han logrado hasta ahora otras instituciones del Reino Unido o Europa. Apoyamos los esfuerzos de Cuba por lograr este objetivo también mediante proyectos innovadores como nuestro English Language Teaching Roadshow y la ELT Conference que llevamos a cabo en años alternos con impacto en todo el territorio nacional. En cada edición del Roadshow logramos capacitar a más de 250 profesores de los distintos niveles de enseñanza y creamos nuevas alianzas con instituciones y expertos del Reino Unido. Recientemente nuestro programa se ha enfocado en asegurar que los profesores de inglés cubanos adquieran una comprensión clara del marco común europeo de referencia para las lenguas y cómo utilizarlo mejor para fortalecer y evaluar la enseñanza y el aprendizaje del inglés a lo largo del país. Más de 5.000 educadores, investigadores y académicos cubanos con una notable participación femenina han recibido capacitaciones que contribuyen a su desarrollo profesional en este y otros temas relevantes, como la evaluación, el inglés académico con fines específicos o la creación de textos para la enseñanza del idioma. Promovemos la participación del claustro cubano en plataformas de intercambio en Reino Unido, como la Conferencia de la Asociación Internacional de Profesores de Inglés como lengua extranjera. De esta manera ofrecemos a los líderes del sector la oportunidad de conocer a sus contrapartes de todo el mundo, intercambiar ideas y fortalecer sus redes profesionales. Como parte de nuestra colaboración, en enero de 2020, Naelsa Velázquez Coviella, ministra de Educación, expuso los logros y desafíos de la esfera educacional cubana durante su intervención en el Foro Mundial de Educación en Londres. Esto tuvo como precedente la participación del ministro de Educación Superior, José Ramón Saborido, en la edición anterior del foro en 2019. Debido a nuestro trabajo, ambos ministerios de educación nos consideran el partner de preferencia para consultas e intercambios en torno a políticas y estrategias relacionadas con la enseñanza del idioma inglés en Cuba. Además, nos hemos ganado un espacio relevante en eventos nacionales de gran impacto en el sector de la educación, como los congresos Universidad 2020 y Pedagogía 2021, al que la directora ejecutiva interina del British Council, Kate Edward-Biggs, fue invitada para intervenir en el foro ministerial desarrollado de forma online por la COVID-19. Fortalecer habilidades en las nuevas generaciones de profesores se ha convertido en una prioridad dentro de la política de la enseñanza del idioma de Cuba. En 2019, un grupo de jóvenes profesores de lengua inglesa recibió un curso de verano en la institución St. Giles Educational Trust en el Reino Unido, que contó además con el apoyo de los fondos del proyecto de la Embajada Británica en La Habana. El curso de 2 semanas tenía el objetivo de compartirles experiencias y metodologías generadas en contextos de enseñanza y aprendizaje diferentes. Fue un hito importante para el desarrollo del proyecto Mentores en Acción, que apenas un año más tarde había conseguido replicar estos conocimientos a más de 600 docentes a lo largo de la isla. Este es precisamente uno de los proyectos con los que continuamos trabajando en plataformas digitales durante la pandemia por la COVID-19 con un entrenamiento online de 6 semanas, acompañado nuevamente por la institución británica. Durante la pandemia nació nuestro boletín de noticias, #EnglishForYou, para compartir informaciones relevantes y opciones de superación con el claustro cubano. Además, hemos logrado impulsar una decena de acciones de capacitación directa con profesores de lengua inglesa de diferentes provincias del país. A través de escenarios virtuales hemos trabajado de forma directa con 344 profesores y académicos cubanos, quienes se encuentran replicando estos conocimientos con la comunidad de profesores de lengua inglesa. A su vez, propiciamos su inserción en entrenamientos internacionales y otras plataformas de intercambio profesional. A través de nuestro trabajo en la enseñanza del inglés desde el 2017 hasta el 2021, 117 líderes del sector educativo de la enseñanza básica, superior y de posgrado han trabajado con nosotros para apoyar la enseñanza del idioma. 6.453 profesores de lengua inglesa de los distintos niveles educativos recibieron nuestras capacitaciones y talleres en todo el país. 8.662 profesionales cubanos vinculados a la enseñanza del idioma inglés en las diferentes instituciones conectaron con nosotros de manera online. 22 universidades y centros de enseñanza del Ministerio de Educación Superior en Cuba elevaron los estándares en la enseñanza del idioma inglés con nuestro apoyo. 28 eventos fueron organizados con nuestra colaboración, creando oportunidades de intercambio con expertos y organizaciones del Reino Unido. 10 millones de personas conocieron más acerca de nuestro trabajo en el área de la enseñanza del inglés a través de publicaciones impresas, digitales, de radio y televisión.
Hello, my name's Mckenzie and I'll be talking you through this introduction to the CEFR. First of all, what is CEFR? Well, it stands for the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages, and it was developed by the Council of Europe over quite a large number of years to compare the languages across Europe and make sure that all of the languages were being looked at in a similar way. So it codifies what level you are, how proficient you are within a language, any European language. All of those European languages are codified within the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages: Spanish, French, German, English, and we're going to be looking at the English version of the CEFR during these presentations. The purpose of the CEFR was to have a common scale for measuring language ability across languages, across countries, across education systems, so that you could compare proficiency of speakers of different languages and judge what they needed to be able to do to improve their level of proficiency. So in that way, it helped to structure language learning, and now all of the modern foreign language curricula within school systems across Europe uses the CEFR. It's also used in a number of other countries around the world, increasingly countries as far apart as Taiwan, Mexico, and now Cuba are using CEFR to help to structure their curriculum and to judge the proficiency of students within the education system. There are three main levels to the CEFR. Basic user is called A. Independent users, intermediate if you like, are called B, and advanced or proficient users are called C level, and these each have a sub-level. So you will hear learners being described as A1, A2, B1, B2, or C, and C1 or C2. So those are the 6 main sub-levels of CEFR. They can be subdivided further into A1.1, A2.2, for example, but most commonly there are just these 6 sub-levels. Each of these levels has what's called a global descriptor, so a general description of the language ability of the students that the speakers are users of the language and what they can do. These can-do statements are the core of the framework itself, and they are different for all of the different sub-levels. So A1, learners can understand and use familiar everyday expressions and very basic phrases aimed at the satisfaction of needs of a concrete type. And you'll find this language of the CEFR tends to be quite specific. So when it says satisfaction of needs of a concrete type, that would be things like, what do you need? What information do you need to have at a very basic level of language ability? So, asking questions about things in a shop, for example. What is that? How much is that? What? How big is it? What size is it? Things that are very, very basic phrases that are aimed at satisfying basic needs that are concrete. The second can-do there is that can introduce him or herself and others, and can ask and answer questions about personal details, such as where he or she lives, people he or she knows, and things he or she has. So, do you have a car? How many sisters do you have? Where do you live? Those kinds of questions that you might ask when you're meeting somebody for the first time or introducing yourself to somebody else. A1 users can interact in a simple way, and provided that the other person talks slowly and clearly and is prepared to help. So A1 users are not independent users. Independent users are at a higher level, they're at a B level. A1 users depend on the other person to help them through the conversation. They can make themselves understood, they can get basic information, but the other person needs to talk slowly and clearly to enable them to understand fully. At the other end of the scale, C2 users are at the other end of the scale. We've just looked at A1, which is the lowest level on the scale. C2 is the highest level on the scale. C2 users can understand virtually everything that they hear or read. They can summarize information from different spoken and written sources. They can reconstruct arguments and accounts in a coherent presentation. They can take part in debates, for example. They can have animated discussions with you. They can express themselves spontaneously, very fluently and precisely, differentiating finer shades of meaning even in the most complex situations. So these people are likely to use the language on a regular basis, perhaps as part of their work. They will have studied it for a number of years and be extremely proficient in the language. They will probably be on a par with native speakers. In fact, there are some C2 speakers whose language ability can be better than some native speakers of the language. In the next presentation, we're going to take a closer look at the differences between A1 and A2 so that you get a fuller understanding of what those levels are. A1 and A2 are the most likely levels to be found within the school systems. Many school systems have A2 as an exit level for primary school if they are teaching children at the primary levels, but it could also be that if students are starting to learn in secondary, that A1 is the end of the first year, A2 the end of the second year, if there are enough hours of English to be able to reach those levels. And as a general guideline, there should be around 250 study hours per CEFR level. So that means that a student needs to study the language for at least 250 hours to be able to achieve certification at A1 level, or to be said to be at A1 level, and another 250 hours before they would achieve the target can-dos for A2. As you can see then, to be able to become a proficient learner of the language, you would need a good few thousand hours of study before you can achieve those levels. Those hours are only guidelines, but it has, through various different studies, they have verified that that is the minimum amount of time required to be able to achieve those different levels. We'll have a look at what exactly learners need to do to be able to be called an A1 or an A2 learner in the next presentation.
The current situation has transformed our reality by leaps and bounds, forcing educational systems and programs to adapt to new learning needs, including English language teaching. Continuous professional development for teachers is a key factor to consider when facing these changes. The results of a study conducted during school closures revealed that the biggest challenges presented during that period were ensure equitable access to the internet and having devices to connect to it, train teachers in remote education, provide ongoing support to teachers and students. Consequently, teacher professional development is one of the priority areas of work for various ministries of education around the world. Working in this direction will allow us to meet the needs demanded by the new ways of learning, teaching, and assessing English. Together, we must continue to work on the same priorities to provide quality English language instruction that contributes to the educational development of young people around the world.
So let's take a closer look at A1 and A2, which are the two levels that are of most immediate concern to you. Now, as I said, there are 6 levels in the 6 basic levels in the CEFR framework: A1, A2, B1, B2, C1, C2. There is what is called pre-A1 level also, sometimes also called A0, which is when the students don't have enough language to be able to be called A1. You could also say they're on the way to becoming A1 learners. An A1 learner can understand and use familiar daily expressions and very basic phrases aimed at satisfaction of needs as a concrete type. As we said earlier on, this is the same description that we had in the first presentation. A1 learners can introduce themselves and ask and answer questions about personal details. So, where do you live? Talk about people that you know and things that they have or don't have. Do you have a pet? What kind of pet do you have? That kind of basic question that you would ask during an introductory meeting. They can interact in simple ways, provided that the person they're talking to talks slowly and clearly and is prepared to help, as we said. So A2 learners can understand sentences and frequently used expressions related to areas of most relevance. So again, basic personal, family information, shopping, local geography, questions and answers about their job, for example. Being able to describe what they do on a regular basis, where they go, where things are, directions, other things like that. They can communicate in simple and routine tasks which require simple and direct exchanges of information on familiar and routine matters. So they generally can't do more abstract things. They can't have discussions, for example. They might be able to have a basic agreement or disagreement, but they don't have the language to be able to interact in more complex ways. They're just simple, direct exchanges of information. They can describe simple aspects of their immediate environment and their own personal background, where they come from, what they've what their family life is like, and they can express their needs. They can do things like order pizzas online or something like that, and other basic tasks that you might need to use language for. We're going to take a closer look at each of these levels in more detail so that you can compare and contrast what an A1 learner can do and what an A2 learner can do. Now, the way that the The CEFR is organised into receptive and productive skills. So receptive skills are skills there where the information is going into your brain, if you like. Reading and listening are the receptive skills. Productive skills are speaking and writing, and we'll be looking at them later. Let's have a look at the receptive skills first of all. Reception is divided into activities and strategies. There's only one strategy, actually, the identifying cues and inferring meaning. So working out from what you hear other information about based on the limited information that you've got, extending that, extrapolating from the information that you have. The reception activities are divided into overall listening and reading comprehension and audiovisual, so watching TV, film and video, which is considered slightly different than interacting, a different set of skills than interacting with individuals or texts that you have control over, like a book where you can start and stop, reread, or listening to a recording or a conversation where you can stop the conversation, ask them to repeat things, etc. So that kind of understanding interaction between other speakers is one subcategory of listening comprehension, as is listening as a member of a live audience, listening to announcements and instructions, and listening to audio or media recordings. Reading is subdivided into reading correspondence, letters, emails, reading for orientation, so to find out where you are and what you're doing, where you are and what is going on around you. Reading for information and argument. Reading instructions on how to do a set of routines, perhaps reading a menu or an instruction manual for a new phone, for example. And reading as a leisure activity, so more reading of fiction and non-fiction that you might be interested in, just purely for pleasure. So A1 listeners can recognise familiar words and very basic phrases concerning their personal lives, their families and their immediate surroundings, and when the other person is speaking slowly and clearly. A2 learners, being a step above that, can understand phrases and high frequency vocabulary related to their areas of personal relevance. That's very similar to the A1, but they can understand more personal information. They can understand more directions. They've got a wider area of knowledge around the language, describing their local geography, their employment, their job, and they can catch the main points in short, clear messages, short, clear, simple messages. In reading, similarly, A1 learners can understand familiar names, words, and very simple sentences. They can understand basic notices and posters or catalogues with short texts, very short descriptive texts. At A2, they can read slightly longer, but still very short, simple texts, and can find specific, predictable information in simple everyday materials like advertisements, school prospectuses, menus, timetables, and they can understand short, simple personal letters or notes. Production activities, as I said before, speaking and writing, where you produce language for different purposes, and the different kinds of purposes that those might be. For writing, for example, could be creative writing or writing reports and essays. In speaking, you have a sustained monologue, which is what I'm doing now. I'm talking to you by myself over a long period of time. So that's a sustained monologue, describing experience, for example, telling a story, perhaps, putting a case in a debate. At these levels, you're not going to be having debates, but just the general idea of spoken production is that you can speak by yourself for an extended period of time for various different purposes. That could be describing experiences, it could be giving information. Think of a flight attendant giving you a safety announcement, for example. Putting a case or arguing something, giving public announcements, telling you what's happening, and addressing audiences, so standing up in front of an audience and giving a presentation, which I would be doing if I could get over there, but unfortunately we can't. Production strategies include things like planning, when you're writing an essay, creating a plan for what you're going to write, how you're going to organise it, and if you were giving a monologue, then more often than not, those are prepared rather than spontaneous. So deciding what you're going to say first, then next after that. Compensating is another strategy that is important to look at. How you can change what you're saying based on the reaction of the person in front of you, how you change what you're writing based on the audience in front of you, and then monitoring and repairing that is looking at how ways that you can go about changing as you go along. So A1 writers can write short, simple postcards, for example, sending holiday greetings, can fill in a form with personal details, can fill out hotel registration forms, basic personal information, and short messages or notes. A2 can write longer than that. They can write short, simple notes and messages relating to matters in areas of immediate need. So they can write simple personal letters for a thank you letter, for example, or to request somebody to do something for them. There are two different types of speaking in the CEFR. Spoken interaction is the first type, and that's how you work with other people when you're speaking. So A1 learners can interact in a simple way, provided the other person's prepared to repeat or rephrase things at a slower rate of speech and help the other person to make sentences and help them to say what they're going to say. They can also ask simple questions around areas of immediate need on very familiar topics. At A2, they can communicate in simple and routine tasks requiring simple and direct exchange of information. So they can using familiar topics or activities. They can have basic social exchanges. They can, so if you're meeting somebody at a cocktail party, for example, you could have a chat, and A2 learners will be able to have that basic chat of what's your name, where'd you come from, what do you do. It's those kinds of things. A1 learners, not so much. They're not going to have the vocabulary or the sentence structure to be able to have those conversations. They don't, at A2, they don't often keep a conversation going. That's usually going to be the other person's job, because they don't have the language to be able to do that very often. So they still need quite a lot of help in putting those, in making a conversation happen. In terms of spoken production, now spoken production is more about the quality of the language that they're producing. So interaction is about how they interact with an individual. Production is about the quality of the language they produce. And at A1 level, that is very simple phrases and sentences to describe where you live and the people you know. And at A2, you can use a larger series of phrases and sentences to describe simple terms like your family, other people, your friends, your living conditions, educational background, and your employment situation, your job. So we've got a basic description of A1 and A2 there, but what does that look like, and what does that mean in terms of language production? And that's what we're going to look at in the next presentation.
The current situation has transformed our reality by leaps and bounds. forcing educational systems and programs to adapt to new learning needs, including English language teaching. Continuous professional development for teachers is a key factor to consider when facing these changes. The results of a study conducted during school closures revealed that the biggest challenges presented during that period were ensure equitable access to the internet and having devices to connect to it, train teachers in remote education, provide ongoing support to teachers and students. Consequently, teacher professional development is one of the priority areas of work for various ministries of education around the world. Working in this direction will allow us to meet the needs demanded by the new ways of learning, teaching, and assessing English. Together, we must continue to work on the same priorities to provide quality English language instruction that contributes to the educational development of young people around the world.
So let's have a look at the specific language that differs between A1 and A2. And you'll have noticed now that the CEFR focuses on language use. It's very much a practical scale. It's not describing things academically, it's not describing things in terms of grammar, it's describing things in terms of how you use language to get things done. That's a very important part of the CEFR. But of course we do need to know what vocabulary and grammar and pieces of language we need to be able to do those things that we need to. There's some useful sources that you might want to look up. The can-do statements that I've been using so far have been written for adults. You'll have noticed they talk about my job, talking about your job, etc. Young learners, of course, don't have jobs, and they're more interested in other topics that are different from the topics that adults are interested in. So the CEFR statements about language ability at the ages of 7 to 10 and 11 to 15 have been rewritten specifically for younger learners. Those would be useful sources for you to look at and use as a basic can-do resource. These statements are written in very simple, clear, easy to understand language that can be used for self-assessment purposes. You will also be able to find Spanish translations of those. There is a full list in all available European languages. And there might be variety differences between the Spanish used in the European version and the South American version, but there should be a South American version available also. The British Council and Equals, which is a quality assurance organisation based in Europe, came up with a document that looked at what specific language do we need to be able to achieve these can-do statements, and they are available at all of the CEFR levels. It's an incredibly useful resource that you can look at, and it shows you what kind of language an A1 or A2 learner will need to be able to achieve those language tasks. Here's a summary of those differences. If you're looking at A1, for example, they need to know basic numbers, they need to be able to talk about prices and money at the beginning, telling the time, understanding directions and giving basic directions, greeting and leave taking, in a conversation, giving personal information and describing habits and routines. A2 needs to know all of that and extend that, so be able to talk about and describe habits and routines in more detail, describing people, describing things, requesting things, information, asking people to do things for them, making suggestions, giving advice. Those advice, invitations and offers are at a very basic level. They become more, they can become more elaborate at B1. Also making understanding obligations and being able to express obligations and necessity, needs and wants, describing places and describing past experiences and storytelling. Past experiences is not really a function in A1. It only really comes into A2, and that might be a good way of distinguishing them, really, is that A1 can talk about the now, the present, the current, the concrete. A2, they're talking more about the past, their experience, their surroundings in a lot more detail. The equals core inventory, as it's called, this inventory of this list of language that is useful to be able to achieve the different functions that these learners need to achieve, is in a great deal of detail. I'm not going to go through everything that it involves, but it looks at things like what functions or functional language the students need to be able to use. So at A1, being able to understand and use numbers is one of the can-do statements, and so making statements such as the ones on the screen. We have 3 cats and 1 dog, my father's 45 years old. Those basic kinds of sentences are what needs to be achieved at A1. In telling the time, for example, asking what's the time, being able to say 7:15, do you have the time please, it's 9:45, the train leaves at 3 o'clock, those kinds of things. Very basic ways of accomplishing basic functional needs, as in the descriptor for that level. It also includes things like discourse markers, and at A1 you're only really talking about and, but, maybe so and because to connect different things, but generally those are the only connectors used at that first level in the CEFR. I'm not going to read through all these slides. I'm sure you can read them by yourself, and I'd advise you to look at the actual equals inventory to be able to see in more detail what these are like. As you'll notice, they go into a lot of detail about the different kinds of verb forms that are useful at different levels, and a number of other categories. So this is a page from the actual inventory. They look at noun forms, at pronouns, at possessives, at prepositions and prepositional phrases, at how students use articles at this level, how they use adjectives, etc., and all the different kinds of verb tenses that they would use at these levels. One of the other useful resources I mentioned was the Young Learner descriptors. And now these are useful because they're like the other descriptors I've showed you. They're framed as can-do statements, and you can use them for self-assessment purposes with the learners, getting them to become more aware of where they are as a learner, and getting them to understand their own level, what that means, what they need to be able to do to get to the next level. So let's take an example of the A1 listening descriptor, for example. So it can follow speech that is very slow and carefully articulated, with long pauses for him or her to assimilate the meaning. Now that's very general at the moment. So what these can-do descriptors do is break that down into much more specific descriptions of what they need to be able to understand from listening. And you can, of course, infer that you can turn these around, and if they can understand this language, they should be able to also produce it at a later stage. Although that would be a different set of descriptors, of course, the speaking descriptors. So I can understand a simple description of a room. for example. The classroom, your bedroom. My bed's in the middle. I have 2 pictures on the wall, that kind of thing. Very simple, very clear descriptions. And being able to describe simple objects, of course. It's a large red ball. It's in the middle of the room. Or why you would have a ball in the middle of the room, I don't know. You could follow a short story if you listen to it and look at it several times. So storytelling, of course, is a very popular activity for young learners, to do with young learners. They love stories, and they like the stories that repeat the same kind of language used again and again and again. Once they hear that a few times, they should be able to understand it and look at the pictures and associate the pictures with the vocabulary that they're learning, and be able to make meaning from those stories. And this is the main one that is connected to the larger can-do statement, is understanding when people speak slowly and clearly and with pauses, so that I have time to figure out the meaning of what is said. This focus on meaning and use of language is really important. Similar to stories, songs and rhymes that have repeated language structures and repeated vocabulary in them are very popular, and are useful for helping students to remember grammar structures, to remember vocabulary, and to learn the rhythm of the language and the pronunciation. At A2, it becomes a bit more complex. It's stepping up a level, of course. So when you're expecting them to produce and understand longer texts. Here, for example, is a description, an example text from the equals inventory for A2 describing places. This is a bit more complex than just describing your bedroom. There's a lot more information in this. There are more complex sentence structures there, and the equals inventory describes how the language is changing as you move up the levels. So here, for example, is another section of the equals inventory, talking about describing past experiences and storytelling. You'll see that there are certain transitions there. There's sometimes I stayed at one evening I was far from, so I camped at the edge of the village and I heard a small noise. So the sentence structure is still fairly simple, but it's becoming more connected. Discourse markers are becoming more of a feature of the text here, and they're being able to link what they're saying and writing together into more coherent language. They'll also be able to, from listening, they'll be able to understand more connected speech and have fewer pauses between the sentences that they're listening to. So, I hope those 3 short videos have given you an overview of the CEFR and given you some kind of a little bit more understanding about what the differences between A1 and A2 are. I think you'll find the more that you familiarise yourself with those levels, that you'll be able to distinguish in your own head how separate those 2 levels are. And it's helpful to think of learners that you know that display features of A1 and features of A2. They're probably going to be a year or 2 apart in school levels. They may even be a number of years apart. It depends on how much you fit into the curriculum, how much they learn as they go through their school life. I look forward to hearing any questions and talking to you in a more interactive manner. So I hope that was helpful. Thank you very much.
A pesar del impacto que la pandemia ha ocasionado en nuestro país, igual que a nivel mundial, y de los retos adicionales que nuestro contexto nos impone, hemos sido capaces de desarrollar diferentes eventos de nuestro programa que hemos llevado a la modalidad virtual para lograr su realización. Ha sido un proceso realmente de aprendizaje, pues no contábamos con ninguna experiencia previa en este tipo de eventos.
So the British Council has proved itself agile in responding to the COVID-19 pandemic, which, like everywhere else in the world, has affected us profoundly, including in the ways that we work. What we've been able to do together here is to help develop virtual tools that have deepened the impact or broadened the reach of the British Council's programs.
Lanzamos entonces en nuestra página de Facebook en el mes de junio y tuvimos entonces un contacto mayor con nuestra comunidad, con nuestros beneficiarios, con nuestro público meta con el que siempre hemos trabajado en Cuba, compartiéndoles qué estábamos haciendo, qué tenía la organización y en qué actividades también pudiesen vincularse los cubanos pese a que no eran originadas acá. Eso fue un punto muy importante para nosotros y lograr la cercanía entonces con el público cubano.
Hemos logrado realizar lo que nunca pensamos hacer, un evento en línea, la 5ª Conferencia de Enseñanza de Idiomas y Cultura de la APCL. Logramos crear espacios no solo en la capital, en la zona occidental, sino también en la zona central y en la zona oriental. Permitimos que más profesores de más localidades, de más escuelas, participaran en este congreso.
Fue muy relevante poder lograr la actualización de nuestro convenio con el Ministerio de Educación, ya que la mayoría de estas acciones, de las capacitaciones que lograríamos realizar en tiempos de COVID, estaban dirigidas a los profesores de la enseñanza general.
El primer paso que dimos fue un curso virtual para el colectivo de autores, para los profesores que hoy elaboran los materiales de inglés para el perfeccionamiento. Este primer curso fue un reto para nosotros, pero al finalizar el mismo pudimos darnos cuenta que se abría una nueva puerta en los modos de superación que estábamos estableciendo para nuestros profesores y en nuestra colaboración.
Pudimos hacer una nueva acción de capacitación para el grupo de Mentors in Action, que esta vez estuvo de la mano de los expertos de St. Giles, una capacitación durante 6 semanas, todo de forma digital, con un intenso programa que se realizó donde hubo intercambios, sesiones en vivo de manera sincrónica y asincrónica y que ha concluido con un excelente resultado para todos los participantes.
I think the course was a great success. I mean, we had some challenges which were to do with connectivity, but I think we all expected this. And we managed to overcome the connection problems. We were using Google Meet and WhatsApp and YouTube and email, and I think everybody managed to sort everything out really successfully.
Despite of being online, the second part of the project met our expectations. It was a great challenge, but a great experience for both participants and teacher trainers because we could share experiences and ideas with colleagues from different provinces in a virtual environment.
En estos cursos hemos tenido una fuerte presencia de jóvenes recién graduados. O sea, esto nos da la posibilidad de ir forjando una cantera de líderes para que en el futuro pues tengamos unos profesores con una mejor preparación.
Colaboramos con el Ministerio de Educación Superior, especialmente con la UCI, en varias capacitaciones, unas vinculadas a inglés con fines específicos y otras a seguir reforzando las capacidades dentro de los profesores de inglés para que éstas pudieran ser luego replicadas a mayor escala.
Otra colaboración que ha sido posible realizar fue con la ALC Jelly a su taller de verano y además el apoyo a su proyecto Learn English is Fun, que además ha incluido la creación de cápsulas audiovisuales para la enseñanza y aprendizaje del idioma inglés, sobre todo enfocado en los niños y los más jóvenes de la familia cubana.
Profesores nuestros han tenido también la posibilidad, a través de plataformas en línea, de acceder a eventos internacionales. Recientemente participamos en el Bienal, un evento que se celebra en México y donde alrededor de 20 de nuestros profesores pudieron tener la posibilidad de asistir y estar presente durante todo el transcurso del evento, escuchar sobre las nuevas ponencias, sobre las nuevas tecnologías, sobre las nuevas formas de hacer docencia.
Destacar nuestra participación en Pedagogía 2021, que este año fue muy especial, pues contó con la intervención de Kate Edward-Biggs, nuestra directora interina ejecutiva para el British Council, y que además se presentó una ponencia que compartió con todos la audiencia significativa que tiene este evento, los logros alcanzados por el proyecto Mentors in Action y otras experiencias con el Ministerio de Educación. Otro saldo positivo de las acciones de capacitación que logramos realizar durante la pandemia en nuestro país está la creación de nuestra newsletter, que nos permite compartir con todo el gremio las noticias más recientes, las opciones de capacitación que ofrece nuestra organización de manera gratuita y accesible para todos los profesores y estudiantes de lengua inglesa.
Lo que yo quiero resaltar de los cursos que hemos recibido es que también no solo han enriquecido a los profesores desde el punto de vista de los contenidos que tienen que ver con la asignatura de inglés, sino que también ha potenciado las habilidades tecnológicas de los profesores para poder interactuar con las diferentes modalidades.
I want to say a big thank you to the British Council Cuba team. 100% Cuban, always professional, always dedicated. They've given us huge value throughout my more than 4 years here in Cuba.
Hello everyone, my name is Minerva Rodriguez. I am the Country Director for British Council in Cuba. And on this occasion I'm going to share with you some information about InglésParaElDesarrollo, which is our new project of collaboration with the Cuban counterparts. We will develop this project in collaboration with the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Higher Education, and the professional associations, and of course yourselves. But let me start by sharing with you some information about British Council. We are a non-governmental organization that was established in the UK in 1934, with offices in more than 100 countries, and in the case of Cuba, we've been here since 1998. The main purpose of our work is to create understanding and to bring people together, to create exchanges between students, educators, academics, artists, teachers and creators from Cuba, and then to link them up with the ones in the UK. We share values and we show our values in everything we do, values of equality, diversity, inclusion. We try to protect our people, we try to protect children from any kind of abuse or harm, and we also protect the environment because we work aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals, and it's part of our agenda to include those in everything we do. We strongly defend our equality policy statement. For us, it's vital that anything we do, we have to make sure that there is not unjustified discrimination in any process and in any activity we develop as part of our programs. So we are committed to understanding, valuing people, to make sure that they feel as equals, they are treated as equals, and that we remove any kind of discrimination from everything that we do. And this is our team in Cuba. We are a very small team, but very committed and very motivated to support you, to help you and to assist you to find the information you may need or the trainings that we will develop in the future. We have been developing a number of actions in the past, so the most relevant ones have been the signature of the Memorandum of Understanding with the Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Higher Education, as well as the collaboration agreements that we have signed with a number of universities along Cuba. The main themes for collaborations and training has been the TKT, the CPD Professional Awards, the contents related to the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages, the current tendencies on teaching English and trainings. On this, Mentors in Action has been our leading training. And also we've been working on inclusion in the classroom and intercultural approaches to English teaching and English lessons. We also have been able to participate in international events and to support the participation of Cuban teachers and professors on those events, as well as the Education World Forum, on which we have taken both ministries of education in different years, and also we've been participating in local events such as Pedagogía 2021, Universidad 2020, and conferences from the gremial organizations here, as well as the ELT conference, road shows, and events that some universities have organized in the country. Among the main achievements of what we've done so far, it has been that we managed to train more than 6,500 teachers in our activities, and that we managed to train the new generation of teachers, as well as the fact that we have specialists in the Cuban universities that are trained and able to cascade any kind of training in the future. Last year, the COVID-19 put us in a challenge that it was really hard. How to modify the way we were training and we were collaborating, how to change from face-to-face to online trainings. Well, we have to analyze the current situation in Cuba and then to see how we could overcome all the risks linked to connectivity, that it was from the embargo and the limitation to use international platforms, and it goes to connectivity in local areas, and it goes to the devices quality and the training people has to use devices, and the training our experts could have to deliver online trainings. But we were able to overcome those challenges, and in the end we managed to deliver more than 15 trainings and to benefit more than 700 teachers from those online trainings and more than 700 teachers for the cascading events. Also, we have a number of people accessing to our visual recorded events and social media platforms that they also benefited from our activities at that time. So where are we now? Well, we know that there is a need of raising the proficiency level of English on the students. We know that online trainings are able to be delivered. We know that we have universities using Moodle platforms, which is free for the Cuban beneficiaries. We have a number of university professors that could be able to deliver trainings for another universities, but also for MINET. And we also know that we all have to work together to achieve the goals and the strategic priorities that the country has set for English teaching. So, considering that, and reinforcing the value of working together, we have come with a proposal of developing InglésParaElDesarrollo with the key messages conectar, intercambiar, and crecer, and based on the Sustainable Development Goals as I mentioned before. So, in this case, which will be the priorities for the first year for InglésParaElDesarrollo? Well, training on professional contents related to climate change and ELT, to the Common European Framework for English, and to new tendencies on English teaching. And then local cascading for those trainings, monitoring and evaluation, where local teachers could share their experiences and we could see what has been working well and what else it has to be done for the future. And then we will also have the attendance to international events such as the Education World Forum and the BBELT, the best of the British English language teaching in Mexico by February. we expect to impact more than 3,600 local teachers with our actions for the first year. So for the second year, we will expand our trainings. That's our aim, not only into rural areas and to areas where there is no possibility to deliver online training, but also to other universities that could be using Moodle. We will look at other contents linked to assessment and evaluation, to communicative skills, also to create like a mentoring scheme, to have like a grupo de avanzada, InglésParaElDesarrollo, to work with MINET in different provinces and to try to get as many teachers as possible as part of the trainings. And our ambitious expected impact could be to try to reach 4,000 more English teachers on the second year. And we all know that those targets are not easy to achieve, but that's why we would like to invite you to work together with us and to make it happen. So many thanks, and let's stay connected for the future.
Inglés para el Desarrollo Conferencia Bienal Cuba 2021, del 9 al 11 de noviembre en plataformas virtuales. Te invitamos a intercambiar sobre tendencias actuales en la enseñanza del inglés y el cambio climático en la educación lingüística. Inglés para el Desarrollo Conferencia Bienal Cuba 2021, un espacio para conectar, intercambiar, crecer.